Matt and Greg used to interview movie stars, but now they're doing a podcast.
Hey, welcome everybody to part 2 of our Apollo 13 shows. This is episode 11, Apollo 13. So I guess that would be what, Apollo 24?
Apollo 24. I'm very good at math.
Awesome.
Yes.
I'm not.
You're not very good at math. Do you have a lot of memories from part 2 of Apollo 13? We're going to have some really good stuff here.
Well,
right?
at the time, we did it all at once. We didn't break it up. That was like a marathon day for us.
Right.
But we broke it up for you guys. So on this show, we're going to have Ed Harris, director Ron Howard, and Tom Hanks.
Yes.
So starting off with Ed Harris, Greg, you want to tell us about him?
You know, Ed Harris, we all know Ed Harris. I mean, he's had a celebrated acting career. He's been nominated for various Oscar nominations. Never won, but he's been a nominee for...
He was nominated for this one.
Yes. Which was Apollo 13, right?
Apollo 13. He and Kathleen Quinlan were the only actors in this ensemble who got nominated, which is surprising considering the caliber of this cast.
Yeah.
And the quality of work that they turned in.
You know, Harris also received nominations for The Truman Show, that film starring Jim Carrey, directed by Peter Weir back in 1998. He directed Pollock, bio on Jackson Pollock. He received an actor nomination, Best Actor Oscar nomination for that 2000 film. And then 2 years later, 2002, he received a supporting actor Oscar nomination for The Hours, a movie I loved. But so that's what we know about Mr. Ed Harris.
Great work right now on HBO's Westworld.
Westworld?
Yeah. I did want to say, going back to the Oscars, that Ed Harris lost the Oscar that year for Apollo 13 to Kevin Spacey in The Usual Suspects. So take that, right side of history.
Exactly. Wow. Well, you know, and also regarding this Ed Harris interview, which we're kicking the show off with, there's some really valid questions about, well, he started in The Right Stuff. Obviously, that's one of his biggest movies, even though that's one of his earliest works.
Another astronaut movie.
Like, if he's starting in The Right Stuff, was it okay for him to start in Apollo 13? Would there be too much of an overlap? And that's addressed in this interview.
Right. Of course, I get to ask the Beatles yesterday question again.
And by the way, Ed Harris was very friendly and forthcoming with this one. He went on and on about it.
I can honestly say that out of all the people I asked that question of over the years, Ed Harris is the only one who answered it with beatnik poetry.
Oh, very good. Nice little, yeah.
Yeah, and then he made fun of me for the question, which I actually got a lot of, so, you know, that was fun.
I remember being intimidated by Ed Harris because I was such a fan of his work. So during the tail end of this interview, listeners, you're going to hear me just whisper my question about his character in this movie called Just Cause, a movie starring Sean Connery, which is now buried somewhere out there.
I don't know how many people remember that one.
Yeah, but so I asked him about his character from the movie Just Cause. It's a movie that I had not thought about until I actually replayed this interview for the prep.
Right. And then he also spends a bit of time talking about the Oliver Stone film Nixon.
Ah, yes.
Which was released 6 months later. And if you remember, in the film, Richard Nixon was played by...
Anthony Hopkins.
Very good.
Yeah.
And do you remember who Ed Harris played?
He played Anthony Hopkins in that movie.
No, he didn't. He played E. Howard Hunt, who was one of the Watergate burglars.
Oh, very good.
So at the time of this junket, he hadn't started filming his part yet, so everything he says about it is speculative.
Very cool.
And then the last thing I wanted to point out, he talks a little bit about Eye for an Eye. Do you remember that movie?
Yes. It was directed by John Schlesinger, folks. John Schlesinger is the director of, is it Urban Cowboy or Midnight Cowboy? Midnight Cowboy, right?
Yeah, I think Urban Cowboy was
John Travolta in the hat, right?
Yeah.
Yes, John Schlesinger, the director of Midnight Cowboy, is the director of Eye for an Eye.
Right, Eye for an Eye with Sally Field.
And Ed Harris and Kiefer Sutherland.
Of course, Ed Harris. That's why he's talking about it.
That's true.
And Kiefer Sutherland, well, he was still in his creepy psychopath phase. We all go through that one, don't we, guys?
Still going through it.
Yep. If you don't remember the film, it was sort of a female death wish.
Right.
But don't worry about it. It got an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. It kind of came and went.
I did that press junket as well. Just a little aside. But again, whether or not I did the press junket, listeners, Eye for an Eye is a movie that you don't have to look up, like Matt said.
Right. But on the other side of the spectrum is Apollo 13.
Yes, which you should look up and watch. But before you watch it, you should listen to this Ed Harris interview.
Enjoy. Before we get started, I've got a question out of left field that I'm forced to ask, so I'm just going to get it out of the way.
Do I have to answer it?
Rocket, man. Everybody.
We're with you, man. So I don't break the flow later, I'll just get it out of now. We're doing a show on the 30th anniversary of the Beatles song Yesterday. Do you have any thoughts on the song, any memories associated with it? And if you don't, I won't hold it against you.
Love was such an easy game to play. I don't know. When was it ever easy? Certainly not yesterday. I don't know. I don't have no big comment on that.
All right, on to space then.
It's the 30-year anniversary of
That song.
of that song?
Yeah, in 4 days.
Supposedly it's the most recorded song in history.
And most played.
And most asked
And most asked about, right.
By me.
Does this song mean a lot to you?
Let me just sit there, I'll tell you.
So as long as we're talking about going back in time, though, putting yourself in the frame of mind of a character like Gene Kranz in the time that he was. I mean, I noticed little details like the POW bracelet. I wondered where that came from. Was that something that you added, and a sense of how you get to make a character like that real to yourself so you can see through his eyes?
Well, he wore one, Gene did. That's why I wore that. Make it real to his eyes. First of all, he had such a great sense of purpose. You know, I mean, as an actor, your first thing you do, you read the script, you have a character to play, and what is this character doing? You know, what is this character's kind of through line? What does he want? What is he fighting for? And it was pretty clear what Gene's mission was to have a good mission, safe mission. And especially once they had problems, was to get these guys back. So you always had that to play, regardless of what's going on. Whatever problem he's trying to figure out, where or how or when, that's the bottom line, is to get these guys back. You know, I had an opportunity to hear the tapes from the actual flight, and to watch a couple documentaries, and to talk to Jerry Bostick and Jerry Griffin, who were both flight controllers during that flight, who were technical advisors. You know, when you get in that control room and all the guys in there and dressed in their little shirts, and everybody's got their haircuts happening, and I really immersed myself as much as I could in the, you know, in the technical aspect of the craft, the spacecraft, and all the different. We're on radio, aren't we? So I'm supposed to kind of keep talking. It's not real good if I just like stop.
Well, I'd like to sort of follow up on what you're saying, and maybe we can expand upon it. Even more perhaps than Kranz's technical knowledge is that sense of command and leadership that he brings to that room. And when he says earlier in the film, failure is not an option, that kind of sets the tone for everything, doesn't it? And guys are starting to get cynical and wonder if they can do it, but he continues to tell them, no, we're not going to lose this one.
Yeah, he was a pretty single-minded guy. I mean, he was an ex-Marine. He'd been in the space program since the late 50s. Chris Kraft, you know, was his mentor, and he was totally dedicated to his job. And he went about it, I think, a little bit differently than the other flight directors. I mean, he did have a certain military bearing, you know, aspect to him, which I think probably was a source of some levity, you know, for the guys he worked with. But they knew he knew what he was talking about, and they trusted him. And I think the bottom line, he really cared. He really cared about these guys that were like his kids up there, or his brothers, you know. He really, really cared. It wasn't just a job for him.
How much of an emotional
strain was it during the time when you were shooting the scenes in the control room, and the character seemed so together, but then at the end, you know, it was such an emotional drain. It looked when he was releasing all of that stress. It seemed. I mean,
yeah. Well, you know, he's for how many days this was going on, he's got to stay on top of it because his job is to figure out how to get them back. He doesn't have time to feel sorry for himself or anybody else, or be tired, or think about the fact that maybe these guys could die. It's all about solving problems. What can we do to get these guys back? And what really helped me was I watched this documentary, which I think was made some years after the actual mission, and Gene was in the, you know, they were interviewing him, and he was kind of interspersed throughout this thing, and it was probably close to 20 years after the mission, but they asked him how he felt when he saw the chutes open and knew these guys were going to be all right. And he got all choked up, and he kind of looked down, and he said, it was neat, you know, and you just knew how much this guy cared, you know, and how big a heart he had, and how emotional a guy he really was, you know. And so I always wanted to be true to that part of him, you know, and was glad as an actor to have had at least a little bit of opportunity to show that part of him at the end, you know, when he knew his job was over, and had in fact he and all his guys had succeeded in bringing, you know, helping these guys get back.
What has the story done for your faith in engineers? Because certainly we've all been on trains or planes or just something where there's some sort of technical mishap, but this is...
Well, I don't mean to be trite, but I haven't really given it much thought. In other words, there was a subway crash in New York yesterday. Somebody messed up. I hope the pilot who's flying the plane back home, I hope not so much the pilot, but I hope the mechanics who worked on the plane care about what they're doing. I don't know how to answer your question, to tell you the truth. I appreciate...
Well, I've talked with a few people after seeing this film, and in our business we fly a great deal, knowing that what engineers over time have done just for the field of aviation alone, let alone the space industry, it's pretty amazing. The idea of putting a man on the moon, the idea of sending people to outer space and bringing them back, especially under these circumstances that we see with Apollo 13. It's pretty amazing what engineers can do.
Oh yeah, no, I think it is totally incredible, but whether that makes me feel any safer in a plane or not, I'm not sure.
As an actor, too.
But I did actually, I thought that last night when I was flying here, I'm thinking, okay, I trust that the guys who worked on this plane knew what they were doing and, you know, tightened all the screws. Because that's their job.
Can you talk about the difficulty of this role in terms of, compared to other roles, and the character you played had to have this massive technical knowledge, and you obviously, you don't, you know, so there has to be a point where, you know, you might be saying lines that you don't understand what you're saying, you don't really have the knowledge that character had, so how do you, as an actor, make it convincing?
Well, I never said a line in the movie I didn't understand what I was saying, because I made a point I would make sure that I understood what I was talking about. And there were a lot of lines in the movie that weren't scripted that I would talk with Jerry Bostic or Jerry Griffin, and I would say, hey, this isn't right, this doesn't work this way, this is out of sequence, or he would not be talking about this right now, that's not the priority, maybe it would be this or this or that. I mean, I'm not saying I was a rocket scientist, believe me, but I immersed myself in the technology of, the basic technology of all of this stuff and all the problems. You know, I knew very well what a PC+2 burn was, or, you know, parasynthion, and I mean, all these numbers and all these figures, what they related to, how crucial they were to the mission at any given time. So, the depth of that knowledge might not have been incredibly deep, but whenever the character is talking about, I knew what I was talking about. I mean, I educated myself enough so that I wouldn't just be saying some technical terms. I had no clue as to what I was saying, because I just figured, first of all, I don't like to work that way. It's more fun to learn about what you're dealing with, and also you can tell. I mean, I think as an audience member, if somebody's saying something, they don't have a clue to what they're talking about. It's like, yo, sure, you know, it was.
It's clear from the quest for authenticity and also understanding the character that you feel a lot of responsibility, because there's real people involved and a real event involved. But what does that do for you or to you as an actor? Because it narrows down what you can do as far as creating a character when you're already given a specific set of guidelines. You know that there was a real Gene Kranz. You could look at the documentaries and see the way he walked and the way he looked at people.
Well, I didn't feel, it wasn't like, I didn't feel as beholden. I didn't, you know, to imitate him or whatever. I mean, I felt whatever aspect of his being I could latch on to, a certain cadence in his voice, listening to the tapes, you know, and obviously the haircut and a certain bearing I tried to maintain, certain little habits I might pick up on a clip here or there, you know. But I'm sorry.
Well, just get a sense of
what the challenge to me was playing this fairly dry stuff. You know, it's not. It's all technological babble, you know, when you first read it, and the guy can't get emotional. It's not about getting angry or getting upset or crying or whatever. It's about relaying information. It's about collecting, assimilating information and relaying it back up to, and trying to get these guys back down and figure things out. So it's all very somewhat dry. But then once you get into it, you know. Well, anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the challenge as an actor is to deal with all that stuff, and yet as the tension increases during the course of the flight and problems become worse and worse and the danger becomes greater, is to somehow have that have that live in you, and even though you might be saying this stuff that's kind of the same way, there's just that little edge to it, you know. There's just something else going on, something in the eyes, however you do it as an actor. You know, you got to trust your instincts and your craft to help tell this story and create that tension and keep it going.
What do you think the music does to contribute to this? I mean, the soundtrack is incredible.
I haven't heard it, so I don't know. I haven't seen him film.
On immersing yourself into character, this character is much different than your character from Just Cause. On being emotional, how hard was it to find yourself in that role?
In which role?
Just Cause.
Well, I don't know. I was really had a good time playing that guy, Just Cause, because as an actor you figure, okay, here we go. This guy can be anything he wants to be. I mean, when the first shot for me, they're leading me down the hallway in chains, and I'm manacled, my hands and my feet, and they didn't use this take, but I just started hopping, and I was just like screaming, I'm a bunny, you know. I mean, it's like, so what? The guy's, you know, why can't he do that?
It's going to be very obvious to people when they see this film that you're also the guy from that other big space movie, The Right Stuff. But you've played like at least a dozen or two characters since then. But still, The Right Stuff, especially with your involvement, is just so embedded in our brains. Except audiences will have to get used to the fact that with this film, you're grounded. You know?
Yeah. Well, Ron asked me when we talked about, he was thinking about asking me to do this part. He said, Ed, do you think it's a problem that you've been in The Right Stuff? You know, because this is another space movie, and you know, you were in that movie, and people know that you were. And I said, well, I don't think it's a problem, Ron. I mean, you know, it's 13 years later, and I'm not an astronaut in this. If you asked me to do this, if we decide to do this together, You know, I think if he had asked me to play one of the astronauts with a space helmet on, it would have been a little bizarre, but it's a different guy. He's on the ground. He's a flight director, so we both figured, what the heck. And I also think there was kind of a nice, I don't know, nice, but there was some connection, you know, between the two films.
Yeah, worried about getting typecast as a space.
I don't know how many more astronaut movies they're going to make, to tell you the truth.
And then you're in the Abyss with that spacesuit thing, and you're just you're
yeah.
a spacesuit, aren't you? You're a space boy.
But
yeah, that's me. Yes, I'm a space boy.
let's really bring you down to earth, though. How about Nixon? Yeah, again, you're playing a real character.
Yeah.
What's the
There were a lot of people don't know much about, because he's a pretty secretive guy, Mr. Hunt. Kind of, especially during that time, you never saw him at all. Very rarely. There's very little footage on him during that time. I've got a couple weeks to figure out what I'm going to do with Howard, so I've been working on this other picture, so I haven't really been able to concentrate on that yet.
What's another picture?
A Sally Field thing with a picture with John Schlesinger's directing. And it's Kiefer Sutherland and Joe Mantegna. Eye for an Eye, it's called. At the moment, I think they might change the title.
Who do you play?
I play her husband.
What's the story about? What your part in?
I basically sit home and go, honey, where you been? What are you doing?
How does that fit into the broader story? What is the broader? It'd be an easy gig for you, easy paycheck.
That's all. No, I don't even know what she's doing.
You don't need to know.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the story's about. They just gave me my part. No, I'm kidding. We have an unfortunate thing happens to our daughter, and then the story just happens. She gets murdered, and
she hears the murder on the phone, doesn't she? That's part of the story.
Basically, yeah. She's trying to get home, and she calls her up, and the phone gets knocked off the line. But this intruder, and it's what happens as a result of that. I mean, the title gives us something away, Eye for an Eye, But I think that title's been used for something else. I think that's why they're changing it. But the script was, we've actually been working on it a little bit. I think it's getting better.
What do you require from a director? You've done so many films now, you've worked with so many people.
I don't really, I guess the requirement is, hire me. And after that, you never know what you're going to get. I mean, it's surprising to me, and remains that way over the years, how little actual direction you get from directors. Even ones who are known to be quite fine. They just don't say a lot. I mean, I really like to be directed, I really like to be talked to and challenged on a certain level, and really try to penetrate some truth of whatever scene we're dealing with. And a lot of times I just kind of let you go, and you kind of have to ask the questions yourself, which isn't bad if they can help you answer them. But I always just thought of directing as more of a involvement than it seems to be these days. I guess there's so much technical stuff going on, and other things to think about. Time pressure, money pressure. If you're doing a studio picture, they don't seem to really focus.
What about working with Ron?
Ron was great, man, because Ron's so even keeled, he doesn't get excited, and if he does, or if he gets upset about something, he'll go to the source of why he's upset and have a private conversation with somebody. He's not a ranter or a raver, and he treats everybody with a great deal of respect. He's totally focused. He's got a lot of energy, and he's very bright, very passionate. He was great working with him,
When the events,
but even Ron, he wouldn't say that much to you. You would do the thing, and then he might give you a little something here or there, think about.
When the events of this film were happening in America, the world was rooted to the television. Were you as caught up in it as everyone else?
No, I certainly remember landing on the moon in the summer of '69, the first time. But I must have been doing something else when this was going on because, it was 1970. I was 20 years old. I think I might have been busy. I don't know, experimenting.
You do keep busy now, though, and going back and forth between stage and screen seems a very easy transition for you. What do you get from one that you don't get from the other, or where are you most at home?
Well, you hadn't done a play for a couple of years, and did Simpatico in New York in the fall with Sam Shepard's new play. And I just love it because it's your whole life. It's 8 shows a week. It's even more than a film because you're pretty much living and breathing it, and you're fulfilling something every night. You're not doing bits and pieces, you're not doing a drive-by one day and a big scene the next day. You're doing the whole thing every night, and there's a new audience out there every night, and you're getting a whole bunch of different energy. And it's a real give and take in terms of that whole aspect of things. And it's live. I mean, it's live. That's the big difference to me. And the beginning, middle, end. You go through the whole journey every night.
You came home from this movie with knowledge of technical terms, and obviously you're more educated in the space space exploration. What other quote skills have you taken home from your movies?
Learned how to shrimp during Alamo Bay. See, most of the things that I've learned, though, I've forgotten. You know what I mean? It's like studying for an exam. You cram, and then it all goes out the other ear. Let's see. Learned some about the space program. I learned about selling real estate a little bit. Learned.
How much did you take from The Right Stuff, and how much of that translated into this role?
Well, it wasn't so much anything specific as it was the knowledge that I could get familiar with this information. Because I really knew the Mercury capsule inside and out. I remember I really knew, and I was so disappointed because they never showed the panel. It was always this way during the flight, and I never got to do stuff like I really know what I'm doing, but it was just the knowledge that I could immerse myself into this stuff and at least fill my brain up enough with it that it would appear that I really knew what I was talking about. To answer your thing, it's not so much that you know everything, but you have enough in your head that your eyeballs are filled with thought, because you at least have something you have something to think, enough to think about in there. It doesn't take that much for my eyeballs to look like they're full of thought, but you know what I'm saying?
5 minutes. You look like you got a lot of thoughts in that head right now.
I don't mean to be self-deprecating, whatever the word is.
Did you go in the wait list for Casey?
No, I didn't go up on I didn't get that thrill.
Do you want to?
I would have gone, I think, if they'd asked me. I'm not sure if they didn't ask me. I think I might have been busy. I'm not sure. Maybe they just didn't want me. I wasn't an astronaut. I was a flight director.
Have you heard from people what it's like working with Oliver Stone, or do you have experience with him? Because I've heard it's a trip from every actor.
Well, what's interesting to me is going in to meet him about it, and then going in to meet him again about it. I'm talking to him on the phone about something, and then going to being cast and going to a reading of the thing. He's like a different guy every time. You know what I mean? And I have a sneaking suspicion that once you are involved with the project and you're working on it, that he's not nearly as uncomfortable with you. You know what I mean? that he has made his decision. You know, you're doing this together, and then what it's about is the work and focusing on that and how to do that the best, which that doesn't bother me at all. You know.
This will be at least the fifth or so role where you've played someone who's either been in the military or worked for the government. Do you have, at this point in 1995, do you have a different view than you did, say, 20 years ago about the military and the government? More or less cynical,
not particularly.
More or less knowledgeable about?
Well, I think for me, it's, you know, I was very involved in the late 60s and the 70s, and very happy when Nixon got kicked out of office, and it was very much against the war. I don't know if that's because I really thought about it, or it was just because it was what seemed to be the thing to do. But no, I think I felt it was wrong at the time. But see, that's what happens. Then my mind just shuts off. I forgot. What did you ask me?
The military and the government.
The military and the government.
How your mind's changed over the years since you played these roles.
I like Bill Clinton. The military and the government, I don't know. The military, they rescued this, you know, Grady the other day, so that was great. I think there is government, and we have to have the military. I think gays should be allowed in the military, and I'm not quite sure my thoughts about the government and the military. I mean,
a lot of people are pretty cynical about them, and especially it's reflected in movies and television.
Meaning
not to
in
trust
cynical.
The government, not to believe them. Even in this movie, Lovell's own wife, you know, didn't know if she could believe the government because she wasn't sure if they were being truthful about the status of her husband.
I think to operate in this world, in this country, there's so much going on that we don't know about, and that we, you know, unfortunately, I would like to know about it, but we're not going to, because you just can't give out all that information. There's too much deception that needs to happen to run a planet with billions of people. I mean, I don't think it's right, but at this point, right now, today, I'm not that upset about it.
Is it still
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Listeners, we're back. Ed Harris is finished. Now, next up is one of my favorite directors, just based on a commercial level.
Yeah.
I love Ron Howard.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, if you don't mind, I'd like to take the bio stuff on this one.
Sure, okay.
So as most of us already know, Ron Howard started his career as a child actor playing Opie on The Andy Griffith Show. He also played Winthrop in one of my favorite musicals, The Music Man. He was the little kid that Robert Preston sang Gary, Indiana to.
I did not know that.
Yep. As a teenager, he starred in George Lucas's American Graffiti, and he played the iconic Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. But then I guess he decided that his acting career had jumped the shark, so he transitioned to directing. And if you don't understand that reference, ask your parents to explain it to you.
I like how you just put that into the whole TV reference stuff. Really cool.
Well, you know, it's a Fonzie reference.
Fonzie reference
from the show.
Yes, very good with that thing.
So Ron Howard has become one of Hollywood's biggest directors. And to put this junket into his impressive filmmaking timeline, all right, prior to Apollo 13, he had made Grand Theft Auto, Night Shift, Splash, Cocoon, Gung Ho, Willow, Parenthood, Backdraft, Far and Away, and The Paper. And then after Apollo 13, he then went on to make Ransom, Ed TV, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, A Dangerous Mind, The Missing, Cinderella Man, The Da Vinci Code, Frost Nixon, Angels and Demons, The Dilemma, Rush, In the Heart of the Sea, and Solo. So this film came right in the middle of a very solid body of work.
Yes.
You would say so.
I'm just enraptured just listening to all those credits that I loved. I loved most of it.
Yeah, really good movies in there. Now, this film, Apollo 13, was nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, but Ron Howard was not nominated for Best Director, which, as we all know, automatically means is not going to win Best Picture because that's just how it works. And every time this happens, it strikes me as strange. I mean, you know what I mean? How can a movie be one of the 5 best pictures of the year, but the director wasn't one of the 5 best directors? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the two go hand in hand. Oh, well, one of the great mysteries of award shows.
Yeah, I just love Ron Howard because he had a very keep it simple approach to directing, but he doesn't seem like when we interview him, he doesn't seem he's very unpretentious. Not pretentious at all, but he's covered so many, like you were saying, he's covered so many film genres, that it's hard to find a more diverse filmmaker in Hollywood than Ron Howard.
And they're really, I mean, you look at that body of work, there isn't a single one where he fell on his face. I mean, there are no bombs in there.
There's no bombs in there, not that I can think of. I mean, a couple of things that I have problems with, but overall, no bombs. And here really, within the context regarding Apollo 13, to release this movie in 1995, the last episode you were talking about the importance of that vomit comet technology using Apollo 13, but releasing a space movie around this time, I thought it was also a very gutsy move. You know?
How so?
I mean, I just feel like regarding where they were, I mean, before that, there weren't a space of like real astronaut type movies other than The Right Stuff. The fact that Apollo 13, where it just planted itself, and ever since then, you know, there's been genre-esque type astronaut films, but this, when you think of just the standard bearers, Apollo 13 is right at the top. That and The Right Stuff, it's few and far between. So risky stuff. I mean, you were talking about the paper. He did that before, but Apollo 13 was a huge gamble, I think. Just my opinion on that.
Okay, and paid off. Great movie.
Yeah.
Now, strangely, I did not ask Ron Howard the Beatles question. I don't know why. Maybe I was intimidated. I can't tell. In hindsight, knowing now that in 2016 he made the Beatles documentary 8 days a week, the touring years, maybe I should have worked a little harder to get that one in.
It was 8 days a week. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, well. Anyway, so here's a fun game. When Ron Howard talks, all right, try to imagine him narrating an episode of Arrested Development. It just makes the whole interview feel very surreal.
I don't get the connection.
All right. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here's something special just for you, Ron Howard.
Inherent difficulties that come with making it a movie that's a true story. But I was curious if it made it any easier, in a sense, because the story is so unbelievable. To me, if the story had been just a movie, I would have been like, yeah, it was a good movie, but that could have never happened.
Right.
So talk about maybe how it makes it easier to do.
Well, I thought working on this project was the fact that it was based on a true story was a kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, there are some incredible moments in the movie, very dramatic, that are so dramatic that if you made them up, people would think it was corny or something, and yet they happened and they're documented, and so we get to use them, so that's a great advantage. On the other side, you as a filmmaker, I really wanted to honor the sort of the integrity of the mission and the individuals involved, and yet it's impossible to tell the whole and complete story. So the challenge became kind of understanding it well enough, and then trying to present an impression, a realistic impression of what happened, in a way that I knew would be, that I hoped would be entertaining, because it's a movie, it's not a documentary, and utilize as many of the really dramatic elements as we could. And one of the great frustrations was that, there are a number of other really amazing and suspenseful, and dramatic moments that we just didn't really have room for. It was so touch and go.
Can you maybe talk about a few of those things you would like to put in, but you just didn't have time?
Well, they didn't just have one explosion. They actually had 3 really big bangs up there. Only one was destructive, but the other 2 scared the daylights out of them and made the ship sort of shudder and rumble almost as much as the first one had. And we sort of, at the last minute, I stuck one of them in, and I just did that on the day of filming. I just said, remember that burst disc thing that we read about? Well, let's just stick it into the beginning of this scene. And literally in about a half an hour, we went through the transcripts and cooked up a little, sort of 30-second version. And so it doesn't cover it in detail, but it at least includes it in that scene. And the process of making this movie was fascinating in that regard, in that we had a good script, good solid, story, screenplay, but we were endlessly digging through documentaries, listening to flight loops, the records of the tapes of the mission control people, and looking at the transcripts and coming up with cool phrases and little details and nuances that just fleshed it out in a realistic but kind of interesting and entertaining way.
It's very clear to the audience all the research that went into this, and the film is loaded with tons of technical jargon. For people that just don't get it, they can still see the mood and understand the mood of the film. But what about getting lost in the jargon?
Well, I made a sort of a conscious decision early on to not be afraid of the jargon and the techno speak, but to also not expect anyone to really be able to understand all of it. While there are certain key ideas that we actually slow down and really sort of underline, and we do explain. I mean, there are moments where we have astronauts explaining things to one another that they would never have to explain. They would just use one of their acronyms and move on, and everybody would get it. But we do stop and explain. So when it's a story point, we make sure that people get it, or at least that was the effort. But otherwise, we just sort of use the jargon and the techno speak almost as a kind of a cool soundtrack. I mean, it's just a feeling. It's a flavor. And the other thing that some audience members have told me that they find kind of fun is that by the end of the movie, they understand it all a lot more than they did at the beginning. And so after a while, you learn something. You kind of get a feel for the lingo, and that's kind of cool. I guess it's not unlike what they've done in lots of medical shows, or cop shows, where you see them around in the emergency room, and you're hearing all kinds of medical terms that you don't understand, but you admire the characters because they do seem to understand it, so we decided to just embrace it.
A couple of things from a dramatic standpoint that I wonder how you dealt with the challenge. One is that we know the ending. We know that they get back safely. Mm-hmm. And so when you have this cliffhanger, and yet it's already been telegraphed by the history that they're going to come through it, okay, how does that affect how you tell the story? And the other is that the characters themselves are so cool. They're test pilots. These are especially the early astronauts. They were unemotional guys.
Right. Well, What I talked to my partner Brian Grazer about this early on, and there were sort of two ways to go. There was sort of the crank it up to the max kind of Top Gun approach, where you think of it more as a popcorn movie first, and you sort of worry about the facts second. I decided, Tom Hanks was a big proponent of this approach, and so was Brian, to embrace the reality of it. And I felt like that is what would make the movie unique and different, is if I could create, using today's movie technology, if I could create a kind of a movie-going experience, that it wouldn't necessarily be so much about, well, what's the outcome? It would be more about what it felt like to be a part of this mission, to be a part of a moon mission in 1970, one that goes wrong. What's the pressure? What did the pressure feel like in the mission control room? What was it like at home, waiting to see what was going to happen to your loved ones? And what must it have felt like to be in the capsule, wondering if you were going to make it back? And so that was the approach I took: is make it an experience, and the really gratifying thing is that so many people say that they found it suspenseful, even though they did kind of know what was going to happen. It's also not unlike a sports story, where you sort of know where it's going and which side's going to win, and yet it's interesting to see how it all happened.
Well, the film deals with heroism in a lot of different veins, and certainly some of the unsung heroes in this whole true history of the wives. And you really delved into what Marilyn Lovell and also
Mary Hayes.
Yeah. So can you talk about how you constructed those characters and put those scenes together, and how you hope that's going to impact the audience?
Well, I felt that the the families waiting at home were the most relatable characters to the broadest number of moviegoers, and certainly the characters that I most quickly connected with myself. I felt that it was important to sort of humanize the movie, and that there was a lot of emotion there in that part of the story. And as cool and collected as the astronauts had to be to survive, as they were trained to be, and the same with mission control people, that the people at home weren't trained that way, and they could express fear for the lives of the astronauts in a way that the astronauts themselves really couldn't, and the mission control people couldn't. So it's a really important aspect of the drama. And the mission control side of it I found to be fascinating, and it was just about a year ago. I know because the basketball playoffs were at the same stage in the finals when we were here on our first visit, and we had this incredible, amazing afternoon where we went over to Johnson Space Center. We went into the actual mission control room, and there was a reunion of, 15, 16 of the mission controllers. Glenn Lunny, Gene Kranz, Cy Liebergott, Chris Kraft showed up. Just a number of important figures from the whole Apollo program, and important figures in this story. And up to that point, the script had really characterized them as sort of technocrats. I mean, sort of faceless. A faceless team in a way, without individual personalities particularly. And from that meeting, I realized just how dramatic it was in the mission control room, and the kind of emotional involvement and investment that those individuals were making. And they expressed it to me in a way that made a lot of sense to me as a movie maker and as a human being. That is that they felt like that they were doctors in an emergency room situation, and their patient was, 240,000 miles away, but that was their patient, and it would have been awful to lose that patient on the table. And they had that kind of commitment and emotional involvement in the whole thing. And so the script started changing quite a lot then in my interpretation of it. And if I had any frustration at all with the movie, it's that there were so many individuals that made such a significant contribution, and we simply, we had to make composites out of them. We really couldn't, salute everyone as they deserved to be acknowledged. And that's a shame. It would have made for a lousy movie if we'd done that, and my first responsibility is to the movie and the audience. But just as somebody who's come to understand the mission, I wish I could acknowledge them all.
And as you came to understand the mission of making this movie, what is the most interesting thing that you learned through your research? Something that just really blew you away?
Well, it's the reminder. And this is something that couldn't be appreciated then, because at that point, they were absolutely on the cutting edge of technology. But now, 25 years later, to realize how much was accomplished with technology that was in fact so limited by today's standards, that amazed me. The fact that their onboard computer didn't have as much memory as like a pocket calculator has today. It's very cool to realize that they were able to use their slide rules and their longhand and sort it all out, and computers that would the size of a room. That's what they were working with. But that and a great deal of pride, and a kind of maybe a little tinge of regret. It's sort of expressed in Tom Hanks's sort of final words in the movie. That here as a culture, as a society, we actually achieved something pretty extraordinary, and while we're continuing to pursue it and explore, it's as a kid at that time, I thought we'd be on Mars by now, and I think a lot of the people involved in the Apollo program believed we would be too, and I'm a big proponent of that sort of exploration, and so.
Do you think this film may have contribute to the case for NASA with the budget cuts and everything that are going on now?
Well, that it's a movie. It's one movie. I hope everybody goes and loves it and enjoys it, and occasionally a story comes along and reminds people to reconsider or something. But I if it did, that'd be wonderful. But it's not an objective.
It was very interesting because after the screening, when I got back to the hotel room, there was Dennis Miller on television talking with Louis Anderson about the homeless, and they were talking about here's a problem that's solvable, and we should be throwing money into solving this problem instead of going into outer space. So people are kind of cynical when it comes to throwing money toward outer space.
They always have been, and you gotta. Clearly, you've got to find that balance, but I guess I'm just not convinced that making it an either or is really the right approach, and maybe that's what we're doing as a culture right now. Maybe we are continuing to move ahead. Maybe we need some sort of really compelling reason, like we went to the moon because it was kind of a Cold War situation. Maybe we need to feel threatened. Maybe that's what would motivate everyone. But I do believe that what human beings do is explore things. I mean, they explore their curiosity, and it's a restless, it's a restless species. It's just what it is. And I think to ignore something that we've proven we know how to do, a frontier that we actually sort of know how to begin to explore, is sort of runs counter to the very essence of what we are as human beings.
Do you feel that in this frontier, this is the first type of film of an astronaut that's been around, of the space program, do you feel that this kind of movie will start spreading out to different other types of movies or genres of this kind? Do you feel that this will be a start of...
Well, I don't know. There's a real, it's a great era. The story of the American space program is a great one. The story of the Russian space program is a great one too, as a matter of fact, and filled with drama and all kinds of untold stories. The story of Apollo 13 has such a great natural dramatic framework. It's a very suspenseful and exciting story that has a beginning, middle, and an end, like a movie, and it's one of those historical events that happens to lend itself to, a one-time sit down and enjoy the movie kind of experience. And so I don't know that there are I don't know that there are a lot of other sort of movie stories out there based on the Apollo era, but there's a lot to be learned from it, and lots of ways of telling those stories and dissecting it and looking at it. That's pretty exciting.
Like how did you do the weightless, filming the weightless scenes? I mean, you broke new ground that way. That I believe would influence other people because you did it. Now you know you can do it. Talk a little bit about that and what the most difficult part of filming weightless as a director was for you.
Well, filming the weightlessness was primarily achieved by getting clearance from NASA to use their airplane, the KC-135, which is nicknamed the Vomit Comet, to actually go up and simulate weightlessness and film in that environment. And when I found out that they'd done a lot of training for beginning in the Gemini era with the first spacewalks and through the Apollo era by literally bolting down a capsule inside the plane and practicing their EVAs, I began to think that there was maybe a chance that we could film. I didn't know sort of how great an endurance test it would be and whether it was possible, because even the astronauts would tell you that they never did it more than 2 days in a row usually, and we were talking about doing it 4 days, 5 days in a row, taking 1 day off and coming back and doing some more, but we went up for our trial run, and everybody got green. Gary Sinise will admit that he threw up. But when it was over, we realized that it was doable. We could manage it, and sort of Tom Hanks leading the charge. Tom Hanks was so thrilled to be playing Jim Lovell, to be playing an astronaut, that he was like the greatest sort of captain of the team that you could ever have as a movie director. Nothing was too uncomfortable for him or out of the question. If it was safe and doable, he was there. And so he really led the charge, but Kevin Bacon and Bill Paxton and Tom just did a fantastic job. And you asked about, what was the challenge of directing in that environment. And it really was the pre-planning and then sort of calling the shots literally as we were in the weightless environment and as we were going through the parabolas. The plane does like a big roller coaster roll, and it climbs and climbs and climbs, and you're pressed down to the ground, pulling 2 Gs, and then all of a sudden, as they start to go over the roll out over the Gulf of Mexico, you start to lift, and it's that same feeling that you get at the top of an elevator or a roller coaster, only it lasts about 23 seconds, and you're weightless. And then the plane starts diving down, and then it starts to pull out, and you slam to the ground and pull 2 Gs, actually a little bit more than 2 Gs, as it starts to go up for another one. And we were doing, one day we did 97 of those, and we were getting very durable with it and very good at it. But the challenges were to plan it out to the extent that it was almost like a 2-minute football drill, that everything had been rehearsed and organized in a way so that all you had to do was call out a shot number, and everybody knew exactly what props were needed, what lighting was necessary, and what the actors were going to be doing, what the camera positions were going to be, and what lenses were going to be on the cameras. So literally you could move from shot to shot in a matter of just minutes, and there wasn't a lot of discussion and sorting out. The other thing that we had to work out was where we were going to take that 2 Gs, because when you pulled out of it, you couldn't be in a situation where the camera would slam down on top of somebody or an actor would slam on top of another actor, and it was a very cramped space. So when we went through to rehearse the scenes, not only did we have to lay out the action and talk about the dialogue and the sort of what was motivating the actors and all the normal scene stuff, but we just had to figure out where we were going to get to and take the 2 Gs, is the way we always put it. And so it was a great exercise. It was a great challenge, and I loved being at the center of all that.
Some of the things that you just one more. Some of the things that you cover so well in your films, you touch on the elements of humanity and family. Can you just talk a little about the type of projects you choose? Are there certain type of projects you like to choose, certain stories you like to tell, and is there any story that you would ultimately like to tell, that your dream project is?
Well, I always try to come up with a story to work on that I think I understand in some way, that I have some kind of a connection with or interest in, because it's going to take me, this has been 16 months of exclusive work, 5, 6, 7 days a week for the last 16 months, and I've loved it. And I've loved making all my movies because I've chosen them pretty carefully. Not always for what I think their commercial potential is, although I always hope for the best, but for really what I thought the filmmaking experience could be and how relatable the story was to me. with Apollo 13, I thought it was just a great example of human beings pulling together in extraordinary circumstances, and I thought that the detail of what a mission was like would make for a fascinating movie-going experience. The other thing that I try to look for is I like to try to be involved with movies that aren't going to look, feel, and sound like other movies that will be out that year. Whether it's dealing with the Oklahoma land race or fires or an unusual kind of a look at parenting or something. I want it to be unusual and different, and so that while people might not be able to absolutely know what to expect with a movie that I've directed, I hope that they think that it's going to be different and worth checking out.
Bride of Frankenstein fits in?
Well, no, that's a rumor. Our company is developing Bride of Frankenstein, but that's not one I'm working on personally.
You're not going to be directing?
No.
What are you working on?
Oh, I haven't chosen the next one. I have 2 or 3 things that are really interesting to me, and I'm not sure which script is going to line up first. Very different. One of them is a comedy, which I'm looking forward to doing eventually, and I know I will. And the other one is a much tougher, edgier sort of crime story, something that I've never been involved with. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think your trip to the moon movie will be better than all the other trips to the moon.
Oh, good?
This movie was excellent.
Oh, thank you.
It's completely away from the regular movies that are going to be out this summer.
Oh, good.
And I think that liftoff sequence is...
good.
That was wonderful.
Tears are streaming down.
Now, you all know that there is no stock footage in that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. The Digital Domain people did a fantastic job.
But were you actually alongside the crawler?
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's real. But they put the rocket on, they put the model of the rocket on top of the crawler later.
The crawler itself.
I got to drive the crawler.
Did you?
Arnold Schwarzenegger's always driving his Humvee around town with a big cigar, talking about his Humvee, and I wanted to send him a picture of me saying, I crushed the Humvee, I drive the crawler.
It's also good to see you hired Jim Eskerman again.
Oh, he's great. He's a good actor.
Yeah, it was neat to see him.
Do you know that he is Marion Ross's son?
Yes, I'm friends with him.
Oh, you are?
So, yeah.
He's first rate.
And your brother did a terrific job.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and he's really, he's a very good character actor, and he's doing a lot of great stuff.
Okay, so we're back from Ron Howard. Matt, you have a lot of insightful stuff to say about Mr. Howard?
Well, not a lot. I got a few. Right at the end, he said that he was developing an unnamed crime story. Most likely that was Ransom with Mel Gibson, which wound up being his next film. Although, as always, we don't really know for sure. We can only speculate. Just before that, he briefly mentioned that his production company, Imagine Entertainment, was working on Bride of Frankenstein. Now, remember, this interview was recorded in 1995, and we still haven't seen that movie yet. But even after all these years of development, they still haven't given up. And it's been quite the marathon. All right, so in 2004, he and Brian Grazer hired Sherry Springer Berman and Robert Pulcini to write the script. They were the writers of the film American Splendor. It didn't get off the ground, so Jacob Estes wrote a new draft. In 2009, there were discussions with Neil Berger to direct it, but that didn't happen.
Wow.
David Koepp wrote a new script in 2015. In 2017, it was announced that it was going to be the second film in Universal's Dark Universe as a follow-up to the Tom Cruise film The Mummy. Bill Condon was hired to direct, and Javier Bardem and Angelina Jolie were hired to star. Then Jolie dropped out. And then The Mummy bombed, leaving the future of the Dark Universe in doubt. But the latest news that I heard is that it is back on, and Bill Condon is still planning to direct. So it's been a very long journey, and let's all keep our fingers crossed for them.
That is amazing. They did not give up on that.
So now we move on to Tom Hanks. Greg, I've got nothing to set up here, so it's all on you. No pressure.
Tom Hanks, we all know him from Bosom Buddies, and I think that's the only thing that he's done in his career.
I think so, yeah.
There's that Forest movie, right?
He was lost in the forest, and he made friends with a volleyball.
Right, and then he ate a lot of shrimp, right? Bubba Gump stuff?
I think he did,
Forrest Gump. We all know Tom Hanks from Forrest Gump. The Man with One Red Shoe, that's another big one from Tom Hanks' career. There's Bachelor Party, folks. Remember?
I loved Bachelor Party. Back in the day, that was one of my favorite movies.
Folks, there's so many things. Where do we start with Tom Hanks? Obviously, for us, people like Gen Xers like me and Matt, we start off with Bosom Buddies and Big. For other people,
He played Alex P. Keaton's uncle in Family Ties.
Did he?
He did.
Oh, wow.
It was a very special episode. I think he was revealed to be an alcoholic.
I had no idea.
He did it. I'm trying to remember. He did a TV movie about the dangers of Dungeons and Dragons.
Get out. No, you're joking, right? I used to play Dungeons and Dragons religiously. He really did?
Really?
Oh.
I didn't realize that was a religious game.
I was pretty much religious.
I just rolled Jesus. Jesus helps me because I got a 6.
So you're saying there was actually a TV movie about Dungeons and Dragons which had Tom Hanks in it?
Yes.
You're not putting me on this.
No. Well, you've got IMDb in front of you. Why don't you try to find it?
Let me look through my feeble brain here and let's say, Mazes and Monsters.
That's it.
Very good, Matt. Mazes and Monsters, folks. It's a TV movie released in 1982. I have to look this up. Bound together by a desire to play mazes and monsters, Robbie and his 3 college classmates decide to move the board game into the local legendary cavern. I guess, does every neighborhood have a cavern? But Tom Hanks was the lead in this.
Yep.
Very good. Did you see this movie?
I did.
That doesn't sound very good. What?
Well, no, it was 1982. I was 12 years old. I don't remember very much about it.
Oh. Now, Tom Hanks, at this juncture in 1995, when we interviewed Tom Hanks, this was post Mazes and Monsters. He was an established star by then.
I think that's what they call it professionally. He's currently in his post Mazes and Monsters phase.
At this post Mazes and Monsters, post a lot of things. I mean, obviously, by the time Big rolled around, he was really establishing himself as a worldwide star. This is 1995. I'd like to say he's at the peak of his powers, but he's always been at that peak.
Wasn't he like winning Oscars year after year after year?
It just seemed like that to me. But right now in 1995, we have Tom Hanks where I gotta say, this is along with, so Forrest Gump really put him to another level. Obviously, Philadelphia, like you said, during those years of the Oscar stuff. Apollo 13 was right up there as far as ambition. So what we're going to hear in this interview, little spoiler stuff, is Tom Hanks adjusting to life, honestly talking about his life as a celebrity and balancing that with his work. And I thought, again, not as crazy candid as Brian Grazer, but still very, very honest, this interview. I also love Tom Hanks's approach, his response to the yesterday question posed by Mr. Matt Levitz. Quite witty, actually.
All right, then. Yeah, bring that back up. Sure.
It was witty. It was fine. So, do you have anything else to say about Tom Hanks?
I don't. Why don't we listen to him now?
Not yesterday or today. Right now.
Tom Hanks, everyone. Enjoy.
We spend a lot of time. Hi, everybody. Is this for radio?
Yes.
Okay.
I got a question. I got to get out of the way. Let's do it now. I'm doing a show on the 30th anniversary of the Beatles song Yesterday. Do you have any thoughts on the song? Any memories associated with it?
Is that the one with the cellos? Or is that Eleanor Rigby?
That's probably both.
It seems like I heard that song for the first time just yesterday. Not bad.
Well, Tom, I wanted to talk a little bit about music also before we go on to anything else, but I want to make sure that you had answered that you were done with the yesterday thought.
I'm done, yes. I have no more.
I wanted to talk to you about also the music in the film. Have you seen the film?
Yeah.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about what the music, how the music contributes to the whole atmosphere, and if there are any particular artists that you or your favorites or that you're into that are on this soundtrack.
So you're talking about the actual records as opposed to the score, the songs? There was some in there that I thought, what the heck is this thing doing in there? Well, Ron, why are you playing honky-tonkin' over this? Why'd you do that? I think they were all in the background appropriately so. Then, during the broadcast, they didn't have Norman Greenbaum playing "Spirit in the Sky" on the thing. That was actually not accurate. But I thought it was. Of course, you're talking to the man who was, that Forrest Gump soundtrack. It's just songs I've heard before. So the only question I had was, do you think Lovell's daughter was really listening to Jimi Hendrix in her bedroom? Do you think that was really going on there, Ron? She was like, 13? I was 13. I didn't listen to Jimi Hendrix, my friend. Somebody else, my brother, listened to Jimi Hendrix, not me.
Tom, when you were a little kid, did you ever entertain the thought of being an astronaut? Were you ever fascinated?
Oh, yeah. See, I was a big space aficionado, junkie, whatever. I had all the models that were made by Aurora and Revell of all the spacecraft and all the guys. I knew I was aware of all the flights from Apollo 7, which was the first, up through Apollo 13, as a matter of fact. I paid great attention to it. That I was, 12, 13, 14 years old at the time, and I knew that I felt lucky to be alive when man was going to walk on the moon. Knew all the crews, knew what their flights were trying to accomplish. I actually felt really bad for the guys on Apollo 10, because I knew they flew all the way to the moon. They got within 50,000 feet of the surface and were not allowed to land, and I thought, that must be a tough gig. That's got to be hard to do that.
Been a dream come true.
Yeah, it was. It really, truly was. I loved getting into the pressure suits. I as an actor, I said, I can't wait for the day. I actually told Rita Ryak, our costumer, I says, when do I get to try on the pressure suits? Because it has been my dream to buckle a space helmet onto my head. And we actually first got to do it in the actual suit room scenes, and that glass is like literally it's an inch and a half in front of your nose, and it fogs up when you breathe, and so you got to kind of breathe differently. It was everything it was cracked up to be.
Jim Lovell kind of put you through your paces early, didn't he? Took you up on a plane at night.
Yeah.
Just talk about what kind of guy he was like.
Well, Jim, Jim either made his peace with me playing him very quickly, or was able to hide his consternation at the fact very, very well. Jim, I think that Jim's personality is the constant, like the speed of light. I think he's very much now like he was back during the program. At first, I was concerned. I asked Ron, "Do you think I can really play an astronaut?" But when I met Jim, and then also read about Jim and read what other people said about him, I realized, hey, I'm the perfect casting for Jim Lovell. He loved his job. He was always laughing. He was the easiest, most approachable of all the astronauts. You can ask any of the guys, and they'll say that. Some guys hated him. Some guys loved him. Michael Collins said he'd be perfectly qualified to be the head of the PR office for NASA because he just loved it so much. And then when getting to know him, I definitely got the feeling that, okay, he's the commander. He's going to tell me what he wants to tell me. I can try to steer this conversation in areas where it's going to go, and he's going to bring it right back to his plan. He had a plan for me every day when I went down to his house. Here's what we're going to do today, Tom. I thought in the morning you and I would just go up and go through the scrapbooks right after coffee, and then when we break for lunch, I thought maybe we'd do some water skiing. That's exactly okay, Jim. If you got the timetable, it's fine by me. And just did whatever he said.
What do you have to tell you about what really went on in the cockpit once the panic ensued? I mean, to any of us watching the film.
Well, there were 4 very definitive stages to what was going on. Prior to the explosion, everything was normal and everybody was in their element. After the explosion, we make a cheat. In fact, the spacecraft did shake, and there was a bang whomp shudder that went on. But then everything looked relatively normal for the longest time, and they were just trying to figure out what was that and why are instruments doing this. And then all hell busted loose because they realized that they were losing as much oxygen. So it went from everything normal to what happened, can we fix this? Then when they realized that it was such a serious problem that they had to shut down the fuel cells, literally the apparatus that creates electrical power, not just batteries, but literally the power plant inside the space. Then they knew they were going to not be able to land on the moon, and that was incredible disappointment. So that was the third phase of going from what's wrong, can we fix this, to it is so wrong that we don't get to land on the moon now. And knowing that they still have at least a week probably before they were going to get back. Now we got to figure out some way to get back. Jim said he was pissed. He was very angry. Why me? This is the word. I should have been on 14. But then that gave way not long after that to, wait a minute, this is so serious that we might die. That was a very, that kind of like cleared the table as far as cleared the table as far as what the next few days were going to mean. When we were when we were talking to these guys, we were always asking them, "Were you scared? What was it like to be scared? How scared were you? What was that feeling like?" And you know, they've all because they're pilots, had all been close to death many times before. And Fred Haise said, you know, we always had something to do. There was always something to figure out. There was always something to try to plan. There was always something to jury rig or build, or as long as their brains were occupied, it was okay. But there were hours and hours and hours when there was literally nothing to do. And that's when they said it was hard. When all you're doing is either trying to sleep or waiting for the ground to work something out, and there's nothing to do. Fred Haise said there was sometimes all he got to do was switch from the forward antenna to the aft antenna. You know, wait till he hears static, reach up, flick the button, go back down. He said that's when it was. He said, as Fred Haise says, that was hard. And to hear that coming from these guys who are very tourists, who aren't poets, you know that must have been pretty rough. And you can't see anything out the window. You can see the Earth, you can see the moon, but other than that, it's just black. You know, no stars.
How real did it feel? It sounds like Ron Howard really worked hard to create those conditions and make them as authentic as possible. We were told that was a big concern that you had.
Yeah.
Being inside of that set, which was, I guess, the same dimension, so it's very cramped, it was freezing.
Same exact, yeah.
Describe what that felt like.
Well, it was actually fun to do it because it was three guys. We got to goof around. But the realities of it just were like hit home. In some ways, it was, this will be easy to shoot because there's no place to go. But in fact, moving the cameras around was actually a very complex thing. It was easier just to stay inside there than climb out while they were doing it. The whole thing about this is that this is why it's so glamorous to me, is because it's a very small space. It's a tiny space, and on the outside of that space is absolute death. It's a vacuum. There's no surviving outside that thing. So the concept of will this thing hold together? Will we be able to breathe long enough in order to get home? That's a fascinating adventure to me. I don't think you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that the margin for safety is incredibly narrow, and that's evocative stuff.
Was this emotionally draining for you to hear Jim's stories and stuff? I mean, when you started to play his character and play his role, did you want to get his point of view in the most authentic way possible?
The authenticity level, I think, was the most important part of the whole movie. Not just the specifics of what they did and how they did it, but also the realities of who these guys were. There's a great article that was written at the time by an AP Wire Service writer that Jim had in his scrapbooks. And the opening line was, you are Jim Lovell. And it described the last 2 hours of the space flight. How many times, and it just went through all the things that were playing literally upon his physical body and his psyche. How tired he was, how cold it was, how emotional it was because it was his last flight in space, how dangerous it was because it is true, these guys did not know if their heat shield was cracked. They had no idea if they were going to burn up. It was very possible that that could have been the case. How he couldn't, should he take the Dexedrine so he'll be mentally alert? Or should he not take the Dexedrine because if he did, then when it wore off, he would be in such a funk they might be so tired that he would make a mistake. Jack Swigert really did write the word no on a piece of paper and tape it up because those buttons are right next to each other, and if he just happens to be tired and do that, then everybody. All of this stuff was really true, and in order to get to that kind of not only mental but emotional and physical exhaustion, I thought was really important to the emotional investment that the audience would have on the movie.
Now, when you talk about acting, we could say this isn't rocket science. This was rocket
That's the joke we had on the set.
So, tell me where that maybe puts you in the scheme of things. Do you feel insignificant, and do you think about your career and what you're doing when these people are going up into space and forging these new frontiers?
Oh, well, especially when Jim came by the set, we all just felt like Van Johnson, you know. It's like, oh man, Jim's here and he's looking at us on we're in our little teeter-totters here and we're flicking switches. We just felt like absolute idiots when Jim came by. But, you know, he just said, well, hey, it looks like the real thing. And then he hung around for a little bit and left. Dave Scott, who was our technical advisor, he was the guy who was always making sure that we were We asked him, are we doing the right thing here? And he'd give it answers. But as far as, like I'm concerned, I have made my peace a long time ago with how silly my job is. But I also understood long before I became an actor what it means to an audience to be really involved in a movie. And I've been so myself so many times. So I've made the intellectual bridge between how goofy it looks and how powerful it can be.
So about the techno speak, how fluent were you?
Well, we all got fluent because most of this stuff comes right out of the transcripts. It's out of the flight plan. It's out of the transcripts. We dug around in there and found it. We switched lines sometimes, but chances are the things we were saying is the things that were actually said. We say them probably in a bit more heated manner a couple of times, but everything that we say and everything that we do, if we say, is actually what went on. When I say we're in program 65 during re-entry, the computer is in program 65. When we all get ready to do the burn, all of the stuff, all the switches we are flicking are the things that you turn on in order to arm the engine and prepare it to power. We were sticklers about that because we had to do something anyway. And it was much easier. Look, why make something up when the real thing is going to be just as fascinating? So we did the homework.
Your director and some of your fellow cast members have said that you became so immersed in the jargon and in the information involved with this project that if you were to be sent up, you could probably fly.
Oh, I could sound like I would. I could look like I would, but I'd be at the mercy of somebody else on the spacecraft.
So you went to the White House again, and you met what was it like? What was their reaction?
They really liked it. And of course, we caught the president on a really very good day. He was, I must say, I told Mr. President, you look years younger. The rescue of the downed flyer and everything like that. I say, I'm starting my day with a rescue, and I'm ending my day with a rescue. So yeah, our movie will be very evocative as far as that goes. It was great to. He actually said, it's so nice to have you back, and I was thrilled that the President and the First Lady felt that way. Anytime you get to go to the White House, you feel like an American equal to all, It felt nice.
Can you talk a little bit about the balance of your life in terms of where you're at now, and do you sort of have to make adjustments, and to keep things? I mean, now you're obviously at a place in the stratosphere, right? Whatever word you might use.
Well, no matter what you're doing, life is one damn thing after another. And I think it's hard to sometimes reconcile the concept, how did I get here? And why me? This isn't fair. And yet at the same time, you can't deny the fact that you're there. So you better get on with the adapting process. Otherwise, you will be eaten alive. I've been lucky that since I was first on Bosom Buddies in 1980, the ancient era, that I've slowly been able to, I've never been like thrust into the public arena like overnight or anything. I've never been a sensation, so to speak. I've actually been able to learn through a relatively anonymous process how to deal with the attention that I have on me. Granted, in the last few years, it's been off the scale, but I had a pretty good foundation of dealing with it in the first place. I know that I'm a movie star, and I know because I get to go to the White House and see my movie with the president. You do have to make a peace with that. You do have to figure out how it affects your life in a negative way, and you have to deal with it.
Your co-star said, acting with Tom is like he has this youth about him. He's still excited. It's like the first day he's ever been on a set.
Yeah.
Does that come from the process for you, from the acting process, and how do you approach it?
It is. It's the process, but it's also the material. I mean, I'm lucky to the point that I don't have to take a job unless I really want to do it. That's really nice. So the reason I'm there is because I have great enthusiasm for what they let to get us pretend to do that day. And I'm lucky the last 4 or 5 jobs I've had have just been, look, I got to play baseball with a bunch of chicks for an entire summer. That was the greatest. It was fantastic. In every job I've had since then, I've got to do something that I never would have been able to get to do in the course of a normal lifetime. So this is fun. There's no question about it, and I have fun where I do it. But part of it also is the camaraderie of everybody else that's involved. I think that. There's an energy of a set, be it on the stage or on a sound stage, that is unlike anything you'll ever come across, and it's more fun than fun.
How important is acting for you and how do you see it on a broader scale? Alec Baldwin recently said it's about as important as being a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. How do you see that?
Well, I think there's more important jobs to have, but there are few that can have the immediate kind of impact that you can as an actor. I know I'm aware of the power of a motion picture, and I'm aware of my responsibility inside that motion picture. I'm also aware, I think, that my art, my craft, very much relies upon working with other people who have just as much responsibility, although less recognizably so. I know I'm nothing without the screenwriter's efforts. I'm nothing without the director's vision and work that is much more demanding than mine is. It is a what's the word? I had it a second ago. You have to work with other people. It is a what's the word I'm looking for? It is a collaborative effort in which your ability to collaborate is just as important as the innate talent or abilities you have that got you there in the first place.
In the premiere article, there's a word equipoise.
Yeah,
what does
that's
that
right.
mean to you? Would you explain that?
Equipoise is this state. It's a state between relaxation and concentration, I believe. It's where a baseball player is in the distance, in the time and distance between when the pitcher throws the ball to when the batter, before it crosses the plate. You have to be ready. You have to be relaxed enough to react instantaneously to whatever comes your way. That's equipoise. I was sitting around, I was actually listening, I say baseball because I heard it mentioned on Ken Burns' baseball series. Rita and I, my wife and I were watching it on TV, and somebody said it's equipoise. That's what playing baseball is. And we both looked at each other and said, that's acting. That's what acting is. You have to be on a set completely relaxed and yet at the same time ready to go whatever distance that the scene requires.
You talked about understanding the power of media, and right now your industry is getting beaten up by Bob Dole.
Oh yes, and it will never be the same. Our industry has literally been brought to its knees by the political grandstanding of a senator that I have much respect for.
Well,
it's a bunch of hooey.
But I don't think you'd be surprised if they take Apollo 13 and say, "Here's an example."
Of course they will. Of course they will. Well, that goes hand in hand, and the hypocrisy of it is a bit on the ludicrous side. If you read Rob Reiner's comments in the New York Times or heard what he had to say, I called him up and I said, that is the thing to say to such things. It is the cheapest and easiest argument in the world to say that certain movies are responsible for the moral decline of any society, and the hypocrisy is not to include all these others. I am much more concerned and much more wary of any sort of movie, be it a cheap kung fu movie or a big summer blockbuster that utilizes violence without consequence as a storytelling device, that utilizes aggressiveness on the part of a purely good man who cannot be killed versus a man that is so evil that there's only one dimension to his character, as a problem-solving device. Those are the movies, and that's the kind of mindset that I think is much more dangerous, not just to our culture, not just to the youth of America, but to the entire world more so than anything else. And I'm not on any sort of crusade. I'm just saying those movies are boring. That's all I'm saying. But to come out in the den of vipers like Mr. Dole said, I tell you, we're going to name names and we're going to remember the count is it. Well, you better name a few more names there, Mr. Senator, because you're missing out on some of the culprits.
How do you pick a role? With Kathy saying, what's next for you, and how do you pick your role?
I don't have a job that's next. I don't know. I pick a role by I literally I'm unemployed. I can't get arrested in the business. I can't get a job. I look to see. I wait to read something and I think this is a great story. That's all. And I have do I have a list of requirements to a story? Yes, I do. I do have to be genuinely involved, and I do have to be genuinely surprised by what I read. And it's just not just a movie-making experience, but a storytelling enterprise that goes on that requires art and hard work and commerce. I pay attention to that as well. But I wait until I read something that I honestly think, gosh, I hope they will let me do this movie. And then I try to do it.
Have you read the follow-up story to Forrest Gump?
No, I understand understand it exists, and I think it's actually been sent to my office. But there will be no Forrest Gump 2. And if it was, it won't happen. The studio would love us to do it. They'd love us to sign it right now. We could make the movie. It'll be out next Memorial Day. It'll have the biggest opening in a decade, and the movie will be half as good. And it's not going to be. It would be a shadow of its original accomplishments, and it will be just a cheap commercial enterprise that would mean absolutely nothing, and I think would dilute the effect of the first movie. That's what I say. God, that's what I say. But there might be an Apollo 14.
Take on sequels in general?
Yes, it is. No, I think that what they always say when they say sequels is, it's never going to be as good as yeah, but what about Godfather 2? They always say Godfather 2 is better than the first Godfather. I said, well, how good a movie was Jaws 3D then, my friend? And what about the trilogy? There are some movies like, say, the Star Wars trilogy. That actually is a story that is told out in 3 very distinctive acts. There you have it. That's how long it takes to tell the story. But you can't do a successful movie, tell the entire story, and then you go back and say, we're going to tell the same exact story again. You tell me if Mighty Ducks 2 said the things that remained unsaid by the original Mighty Ducks. You tell me if there's any reason to have that motion picture made. You tell me.
So, I just have one question, in terms of your wife and your celebrity. Everyone has, an ego, and everyone has an identity, and it surely must be difficult on some level to maybe stand behind the scenes or behind the curtain. Obviously, she supports you big. I was wondering what you're feeling.
Well, it's not. There are periods of difficulty. There are periods of just having to deal with it because what is happening is affecting your private life. Now that goes on for a while. It's hard to get through, say, for example, an Oscar race. There's pressure, there's no doubt about it, because you wake up late at night thinking, I'm going to lose, and then you wake up other nights and say, I'm going to win, and I'm not going to know why. It affects, and you have a degree of attention on ourselves as a couple that is very, that's very intense. It's a white-hot glare of media attention. It goes away after a while, and it's not hard to forget about it when it's not there. This is our life. The thing I say to Rita, my wife, is that, look, this is our lives. This is what we do. We're not bankers. I'm not a dentist. You're not a real estate salesman. This is what our lives is, and we deal with it because that's what life is one damn thing after another.
She helped to ground you?
Yeah, and I helped to ground her too. Yeah, without question. I think that sometimes we both do come home and say, "You've worked really hard, and I don't care." She was in this movie Mixed Nuts, right? And she had to go to work every day at 4:45, and I was laying in bed just pointing my finger and saying, "Ha ha." And then when she would come home after a day of working like 14 hours, I said, "Now, so you're home from work, you're 14 hours, worked all day long. You notice that I'm not in your face about anything, am I? I ordered you room service. Here's your salad. You sit and enjoy." It's the competitive aspect doesn't exist. It doesn't. But there is a time when both of us, either she or I or ourselves together, have to come to grips with the reality of a situation and make our peace with it. That can be hard sometimes, because sometimes it's not fair to demand the other person to make peace with a circumstance.
How about for the family? How do you give the kids a normal life?
Well, that's hard, but part of it is to realize, I talk about it as my job, that's my job. But they've gotten used to the fact that they know the perks, because in all honesty, they've gone places that they never ever get to do, and they've seen things, and they have Polaroids of Madonna with their arms around them, and things like that. Not all kids have that, but they've also seen the other side of it as well. They've been with me a couple of times when all hell broke loose, and we were very concerned with literally my security and theirs. So they have seen both sides of both the pleasures and the dangers. And they're very much aware of it, and they kind of shrug it off because they've been on the ride, some of it too. They've put up with a lot because of my celebrity, and I'm lucky that they're as good at kids as they are. There you go. You're welcome.
Yeah, the celebrity drywall company.
Were you there?
Yes.
Oh, that was a great line. It came out of nowhere. I was happy for it. Sure. Can I just borrow this one Sharpie?
It's Kathy with a C, and if you could sign another one for my company.
Oh, I gleefully put that one on
I'm
the
sorry,
air.
I don't mean to be
love that
like.
one.
Who did I say? It was Kevin Costner and Tom Cruise and myself?
I think you said you had some business out in
And the one
Glendale
below,
or
I think
somewhere.
this is the one below to MJI Broadcasting, or just MJI. Nice to see you again. It's always a
Nice to
pleasure
see you.
speak with you.
Thanks.
So that was Tom Hanks, everyone. Obviously, I think we all know his voice pretty well. He did say he didn't have his next film lined up yet, and he even joked, "I can't get a job." In hindsight, that feels like a smokescreen, because the very next year he released That Thing You Do, which he not only starred in, but he also wrote and directed it. So clearly he was already working on that when this interview took place.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, he just wasn't ready to talk about it yet.
He's a liar. That thing you do is lie. That's the thing he does.
Oh, I get it.
I guess.
And then in answer to one of my questions, he went off on the concept of sequels in general. You know, he doesn't like them, he doesn't do them, he sees them all as terrible with no reason to exist. And he raised some very good points that I would love the opportunity to ask him about on his press tour for next year's Toy Story 4. But only because I didn't get a chance to ask him that when he was out promoting the third Da Vinci Code. I'm just saying, folks, be careful out there. Tape lasts forever.
Wow. What a chummy way to end the Apollo 13 deep dive 2-episode universe.
Yeah, we hope that you've enjoyed all of these interviews in this 2-part episode. We have a really great one coming up in our next episode.
Very memorable one.
And a great movie, and starring one of my favorite people. Of course, we're talking about Jumanji, the original, with Robin Williams.
Well, till then, Jumanji's right around the corner.
It is. Do we want to do our plugs?
Not really.
Okay.
But if you do, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Matt
and Greg.
And mattandgregpodcast.com as well.
That's the webpage.
That's the webpage. Please give us your insights, comments, criticisms about our show.
You can catch the show on SoundCloud, on iTunes, but we also are now doing a YouTube version with a visual component.
Yes.
So if you want to look for us there, we've got that. Basically, the show is everywhere. You can't get away from it. We can't get away from it.
The show's everywhere. You know what? I don't spend a lot of hours on YouTube. I should spend more, but honestly,
you should.
Watching the YouTube channel.
What's wrong with you? Why don't you spend more hours on YouTube?
I should spend more time on the Matt and Greg interview a bunch of people.
No, not ours. Just in general.
Just in general.
You should spend more time on YouTube.
Oh, I should?
Yeah.
But you know what? The channel.
You're wasting your life, dude.
I am. You know what? The stuff that you're curating on our show is excellent, Matt. So please go to our YouTube channel as well.
Anyways, that does it for Apollo 13. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time with Jumanji.
We will. Bye, guys.
We now return you to your regularly scheduled life.